Welcome to Reddit Aliens. What is the scariest or most disturbing historical fact? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Happy holidays. On Christmas Eve 1975, Messias Nguema had 150 suspected dissidents hanged at the National Football Stadium in Malabo, while amplifiers were playing Mary Hopkins' song, "Those Were the Days." When Mongols occasionally decided to kill the entire population of cities, each Mongol soldier was required to kill a certain number of individuals, and as proof, he had to cut off their ears and present them to his commanding officer. Also, they sent troops back to the city several days later to kill the people who were hiding. The baby killing tree. During the Cambodian genocide, there was a designated tree which soldiers would beat babies against to kill them. Just pick them up by the feet and slam their heads on the tree. Elephants were used in India to execute people. This traumatized the elephants, leading to one that was retired and would randomly kill people. They did this by crushing people, but could also crush slowly, limb by limb. The more you know. In the early 1500s, there was a guy named Gheorghe Dosa. He ended up leading a peasant revolt in the Hungary Romania region. When he was finally captured, he was killed in a very unique fashion, and rather horrible. See, in order to mock his hopes to be king, he was forced to sit on a red-hot iron throne, wear a red-hot iron crown, and hold a red-hot iron scepter. Then, as he is being burned alive by this red-hot regalia, they march in 9 of his revolt leaders. They had been starved for days. Leading them in was Gheorghe's younger brother. The younger brother was cut in half before Gheorghe, and the remaining prisoners watched as they took red-hot pliers and began to pull strips of his flesh off. The remaining prisoners were then told to go to Gheorghe and start to eat him where the flesh had been removed. Gheorghe eventually died from this torture, and the peasant prisoners who ate parts of Gheorghe were allowed to leave. Don't know if anyone said this, but the Russian Army of the Dead always sticks in my mind. Short story short, German wanted a Russian stronghold, used chemical warfare to draw out the Russians. Quick and easy, right? Except that instead of surrendering, the Russians charged full force at the Germans, all while they bled from their eyes and their organs melted. Scared, the Germans so badly, they stayed away for months. In ancient Rome, there was said to be a glassmaker who invented a type of glass that was flexible and unbreakable. He demonstrated the properties to Emperor Tiberius Caesar. After demonstrating the properties of his invention, Caesar, thoroughly impressed, asked if he was the only one who knew how to make it. The man replied yes, and he was swiftly executed because Tiberius Caesar was afraid that the unbreakable glass would be worth more than gold. The Japanese soldiers made a game of tossing Nanking infants into the air, with a soldier trying to poke it midair with his bayonet. The event was so commonplace that the Nazi in charge of the safe zone for Nanking refugees needed therapy and medication after his tour. This is not the last of what the Japanese did to the people of Nanking. You can find those pictures for yourself on Google. Don't do it. Here's one of many. Auschwitz is perhaps the best known symbol of Nazi genocide because some people actually survived and told stories of the Auschwitz slavery experience. Some camps were used for extermination only and had 99.9% fatality rates. See Kemlo and Treblinka. After the Irish famine, or genocide depending on how you see it, so many people died or emigrated that the country's population has only got back to the same level this year. In the 18th century, there was a socialite, Madame Lalaurie, who lived in New Orleans. She whipped her slaves, gouged their eyes out, and poked holes in their skulls, leaving maggots to infest the openings. She would also break the bones of her slaves and let them heal incorrectly to form weirdly shaped bodies. She was basically one of the worst murderers in history. She would also open the heads of her slaves and mix their brains around. Unfortunately, she was able to escape her town, and the slaves never got proper justice. Terrari, the man who was always hungry. Look up his story, it's horrifying and disgusting. The Congo Free State is one that goes beyond just normal European colonization and turns into industrialized sadism. There is a torture device from the olden days called the pear of anguish. This was essentially the size of a large pear or a grenade that fit into a person's mouth. Your torturer would then turn a mechanism on this device which would expand the pear in size. Needless and unfortunately to say, it would break or dislocate the person's jaw, this mutilating the person, if not killing them in the end. European nobles once had a meeting in a castle where they combined weight destroyed the floor they were sitting on, and they fell into a room where all the feces was kept, and they drowned in a very disgusting manner. Something I read a while ago. Carried out by John Watson, the Little Albert experiment aimed to find out if fear was inherently ingrained or culturally taught. To find out, he essentially repeatedly traumatized a sick baby that he kidnapped every day from the on-campus daycare facility without its mother's knowledge by presenting it with soft, fluffy things while slamming a gong with a hammer from behind a curtain to scare the child. The baby developed a phobia of white, fluffy things, and the experiment ended because Albert's mother found out and moved them away. According to relatives, little Albert never learned to walk or talk and eventually died at the age of 6. Genghis Khan killed 20% of the world population. Many royals had practiced incest, usually with cousins. It was mostly for strategic diplomacy, though some get involved willing without such. It was common up until recently. It's now common for some royals to go for a non-royal as a partner, which increases the survival rate of their offspring. As you can guess, it was a flip of a coin when it comes to any faults to their child. MK-Ultra, Tuskegee syphilis experiment. Both of these are very scary to me because they were carried out by the US government on innocent civilians. That doesn't even matter. You shouldn't experiment on unwitting people, period. MK-Ultra is fascinating to me, whereas Tuskegee is just downright horrifying. I read somewhere, don't quote me, that more than half of everyone who has ever died was in infancy. That's both believable and horrifying. The United States conducted radioactive experiments on citizens in the 1940s through the 60s. Some of the people were already critically ill with cancer or diseases. Some people were perfectly healthy. They even gave radioactive cocktails to pregnant women. Some of the babies born went on to develop cancer and never survived childhood. The Bharari murder-suicides. There's a fascinating 3-part Netflix series on the topic now, but long story short, 11 family members committed suicide together at their home in India. Familial brainwashing due to mental illness. Kind of fried when you realize that the young ones were as little as 14 years old. Louisiana and other states passed laws during slavery that said it's not possible to rape black women because they are inherently sexual and naturally asking for it. These came after an enslaved girl tried to report an older enslaved man for raping her. And don't even get me started on J. Marion Sims. Unit 731 was a lethal human experimentation first established in 1932 that involved mostly Chinese prisoners, basically a small group of, I think, Japanese scientists that were interested in the creation of biological weapons conducted this experiment. The experiments they did on people were absolutely horrendous. The prisoners were infected with the bubonic plague, and many things were performed on the prisoners, such as vivisections, live autopsies, amputations, lethal injection, and much more. And if you were to look this up, be careful. The pictures are very gruesome. Genghis Khan's army once defeated an opposing force and rounded up all the men, including the leader, who was a prince. They made the men lay on the ground, and on top of their bodies they built a stage. That night the Mongols partied hard on that stage and slowly crushed the soldiers of the opposing army underneath them. Metal. If you were an Egyptian warrior during the Persian War, the scariest thing about the ordeal would be the fact that everyone's wearing the religious artifacts you worship. They even had cats follow them into battle, which Egyptians couldn't kill, also for religious reasons. During Stalin's execution by starvation of the Ukrainians, the potato famine, a boy who survived it recalled how flies would lay eggs in the eye sockets, nostril, and sides of the mouth of those soon to die. He recalled how hair begins to grow on the forehead and between the eyes, and it was easier to tell them no when they begged for a kernel of corn because they'd be gone soon. He recalled how a man who wasn't dying of starvation was found to be a cannibal who lured these young boys with the promise of a piece of bread. How a mother cleaned and dressed her starving baby, laid her in a crib, and then hung herself while the baby cried because she couldn't accept failing her infant and seeing her starve to death. The baby died a few days later. So horrific. The so-called nuclear close calls, situations where a country with nuclear weapons seriously considered using them, especially the incidents in 1979 and the two in 1983. In 1979, the US NORAD system gave a warning about an incoming Soviet nuclear attack and estimated 3 to 7 minutes time to make decisions about a counterattack. After rechecking with additional radar, it was confirmed to be a false alarm. It gets a bit more scary when you know that the radar check took about 6 to 7 minutes. Whoa. When the USS West Virginia was sunk during the attack on Pearl Harbor, 3 crew members were trapped in an airtight storeroom deep within the ship for 16 days before finally dying from asphyxiation. There was no way to get in and rescue them without either risking their own lives or the lives of the rescue divers. Nobody wanted to stand guard near West Virginia, especially at night, because all you would hear is them banging on the hull of the ship in vain hope that someone would be able to save them, every night getting slower, weaker, and more infrequent, before finally dying out for the last time on December 23, 1941, 80 years ago today.